It's a Quiet Earth Orchestra album, and it'll be album number 3 of Quiet Earth Orchestra, and it's called World Without Words 2, and it's a follow-up to something I did back in, I think it was 94, 95, something like that. So kind of a sequel to that, and yeah, it's objectively speaking, it's a very pleasant album of instrumental stuff, half ambient, half kind of like relatively non-obtrusive instrumental prog, and yeah, it's a pleasant and colorful album. It doesn't really, it doesn't beat anybody over the head. It's pretty smooth stuff, kind of, I don't know, AOR from a different planet, basically. Well, it's basically, the DVD thing is a data DVD that I'm putting together that'll have all 10 of my current albums in MP3 form, encoded at 320, so they sound pretty good. With lyrics and credits and artwork, and then it'll have some of these, probably all these video interviews and a couple music videos I did, I think like 3 of them, and some other stuff, some acoustic performances and whatnot, but all kind of slapped together just as a way of, I guess, kind of ensuring my legacy. The kind of bitter irony of my career is that as time has gone forward, musical tastes have kind of gone down, and my musical abilities and production abilities and everything have gone up. So the commercial appeal of what I do is just not really there, and I'm too idiosyncratic an artist to really fit into any particular segment or subsegment. I mean, I'm pretty much in a world all my own, comparable to a few other artists in some ways, but really I'm just kind of me and way too eclectic for my own good. So every time I put something out, the response to it diminishes, even though the artistic quality of it has greatly evolved. So at this juncture, I don't know that I'll ever be doing anything again. I mean, I think this is probably my last musical statement. And, it evolved out of, this latest album evolved out of COVID, basically, kind of being at home for a couple years, doing light-duty kind of work and just working on an album. So, so this DVD is basically going to be a way to just get it in front of people, safeguard all my albums, so that if Russia vaporizes us, there might be a few copies for future archaeologists to discover. I mean, at this point in time, as we're speaking, Russia has been in Ukraine for a little while, for a couple weeks now, and Putin's waving around the threat of a nuclear holocaust. So who knows how things are going to go? And yeah, that's kind of what it is. I'm putting this together, and hopefully within a month or so it'll be something I start sending out to select people, and hopefully they actually have a computer they can open it up on and actually listen to the stuff. If not, it's just kind of floating around out there unheard. And that's just the way it is. There's no one actual John Ludi song. I mean, there's no one style that you can go, yeah, this is what this guy sounds like. You actually have to listen to what I do in a concentrated and focused way over a period of time, and then you go, oh yeah, and then there's no mistaking my voice and the way that I put things together. But in this day and age where attention spans are what they are, and where most music produced these days is basically a background to TikTok dance videos, yeah, no one has the patience for that. And the catch-22 for where I'm at right now is that my music would really probably appeal to people who are into music from the 60s to the 90s, roughly. And the sad fact is that most people in that age bracket are no longer actively pursuing new music, new artists. They just listen to their old stuff. And younger people, there's a certain amount of them who have caught on to the notion that the older stuff is actually really good. But they're out there buying Led Zeppelin albums and stuff like that. They're not going to pursue, the work of some guy like me. I'm kind of a very, very small niche artist. And so that being said, what I do is eclectic. What I do tends to be fairly progressive. But it's all over the map. I mean, I have some stuff that could be, I am ambient to punk. I mean, in all kinds of places in between. You really have to actually tap into it and listen to it to be able to figure out where I'm coming from. And I don't even know where that is either. So there you go. World Without Words 2 is sort of a sequel to an album I did back in about 95. And I didn't intend on actually making the album. It's my COVID album. I spent the last 2 years hiding from COVID. And I had a bunch of ambient pieces that I had done. It's a little side project called Calm the Hell Down. So I took some of those, reworked some of them, and then I had these really cool presets on a multi-effects pedal that I had programmed a few years ago, and I always wanted to take those and do something with them. So the more percussively oriented songs on there are take advantage of that, and I really, it was nice to be able to work with tones and textures and just do an album where I wasn't, trying to make a big statement or proselytize or anything, because I really feel like there's no point in it anymore. So there's that. I mean, the people that have heard it so far, the handful have really, really liked it and said that it was just a really smooth and consistent and great to listen to piece of work. So there it is. So Mistakes Have Been Made, to me, is kind of like the capstone from my career, my magnum opus. A very eclectic set of tunes, all over the map is most of what I do. And almost all my albums have some kind of underlying theme, usually reflected in the title. And this one's no different. So Mistakes Have Been Made is sort of like an album of kind of regret, kind of reflection on mistakes personally, but more mistakes that have been made as a culture, as a collective, as a species. And so that's kind of the theme. And this is another album that the people who have actually heard it really rave about. This, I've several people have said this is the best thing I've heard in years. So, my only thing is I wish more people would hear it. But we'll see how that plays out in time. It's, the final song is, called Afterlife, and it's kind of a reflection of where I am now, which is, yeah, you know, this is all kind of an illusion, this physical reality thing. This is all, I'm not entirely sure what its purpose is, but it does seem to be a finite one. And afterlife is sort of, you know, this little hint of redemption at the end of all this drama and sadness about the plight of our species and the planet we're on. So the two albums, Obsolescence and Rage, I did those in 2015 at the same time. Originally it was just going to be one album, but I had two different things going on. I mean, it was just pumping out songs, and there were some older songs I had done under a different stage name on an album called Fashionably Angry, and I really wanted to redo some of those and give them a little bit, you know, do them a little bit more justice. Because the production on that album, which was mine, was pretty terrible. So I redid a bunch of songs and wrote a bunch of other songs, and they were kind of stylistically at loggerheads because half of them were really personal songs and half of them were really, you know, kind of externalized, topical, punkish kind of things. So I just did two albums, and so Obsolescence is it's a reflective album. I just turned 50, you know, around that age, and was recording this, and it was sort of, you know, the artist at 50. And it was just kind of, yeah, just looking back and ruminating on different choices and where, you know, where you are heading in this culture. Once you've accumulated all this wisdom and all these skills and all this know-how, you suddenly become obsolete. Rage as an album is, you know, it's reflective of the title. I mean, it's a lot of external stuff, kind of political, screaming at the machine, basically, and in total futility. The Quiet Earth Orchestra self-titled album is actually, it's actually kind of my homage to 70s Prog. But because I've got this kind of, I don't know, gothy feel to a lot of what I do, it kind of sounded like if Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, and Dead Can Dance collaborated together. It's got that kind of murky, gothy vibe to it in my production. And good album, I think. A lot of people really liked it. It got torrented and bootlegged a lot. So there's probably tens of thousands of the thing wandering around and all over the planet on people's hard drives or whatnot. So, and it's, I don't know, you know, it's consistent. There's the side A were 3 tunes that I had worked on for years and kind of perpetually backburnered for like 7 years. And then the rest of it, I just kind of worked on that in a pretty zippy pace. But all of it, I think, is, you know, high quality work. And if you like, you know, kind of symphonic prog, it's probably a good album to check out. Soft War, self-titled, is that's the name of a band that I was in for 5 years back in Detroit. And I reconnected with my cohort, co-songwriter, other guitarist, Greg Kutcher. And we thought it would be a really fun idea just to take a bunch of our songs from, you know, the mid to late 80s and revamp them and just see what happened. And it came out, I think, pretty damn well. I think it's a really good album. Like most of my stuff, it's not current. It's not current to what's going on now and what was going on in 2008 when we put it out. But I think it's, in terms of, you know, song structure and everything, and writing and execution, production, I think it's a really good album. Again, you know, the people that have heard it have really liked it. And it's one of the only albums in this 10-album collection that really features anybody else to any extent. And you can tell, I mean, I have my own vibe and my own, even though I play a bunch of instruments and sing, you know, patterns repeat. And having Greg be kind of 50-50 on this project was really refreshing, because it just adds so much dimension to the work. So, and he's a brilliant guitarist. He's one of my favorite guitarists. Just a really unique stylist when he's doing his own thing. And yeah, and just a, you know, a joy to work with in terms of the collaborative effort. Rise Above or Fall Below is kind of, yeah, that's, you know, in some ways Mistakes Have Been Made is sort of a sequel to that album, because there's this eclectic aspect of it, and it's, again, I mean, I think it's a really well executed and well produced album. It's all over the place in terms of styles. I mean, there's there's a kind of, you know, gothy stuff, there's kind of punkish stuff, there's more ethereal, you know, kind of spiritually oriented stuff. It's, yeah, it's, again, like everything I do, really hard to pin down. But it's one of those that just got lots of rave reviews when I put it out back in, I think it was 2005, 2004, 2005. And, yeah, again, an album I'm really proud of. I'm really happy about that album. So Hell's Laughter and Heaven's Ache is the first one I did under the stage name John Ludi. And it reflected a very, you know, big stylistic change in terms of going from more straight ahead kind of punk to, you know, more artsy, kind of soft focus, use of tones and textures. Not the best production in the world, and I think it, I think for like a first album, sort of, not really, but I think that it's a good album in terms of the songs, the songwriting. The arrangement, some of them could be better. The drum programming could be more naturalistic. The production was not great. I've remastered it a couple of times, and I think I've finally settled on remastering that does it a little more justice. It's not equal to that which came later, but I think it's a good album. I like it, and I love a lot of the songs that are on there. Quiet Earth Orchestra, World Without Words. That one goes back to like 94, 95. And it was a Fostex 8-track recording I was doing while I was, I had a soundtrack company in Minneapolis. And just kind of experimental, just playing around. I had this Oasis drum machine that I detuned a bunch of the pads on and started experimenting. I did that one and a thing called House of Usher, which was really scary, obnoxious, misanthropic, industrial kind of stuff, which I haven't re-released or anything. That's kind of dead. But I did that concurrent with World Without Words, and kind of was just playing around with these drum machine patterns that didn't sound like drum machine patterns, and the way people normally use them, and instrumentation that was kind of off and kind of world beatish. Had kind of, I was aiming for some kind of world beat sort of thing. And initially I was going to make it a lyrical album. There were going to be actual songs in it. I had pictured this big sort of, the notion was that I was going to do this story about alien species on another planet, basically echoing what humans have gone through. Our wars and our, destruction of the environment and et cetera, et cetera. But due to the limitations of the 8-track, I abandoned that and just did it instrumentally. 4-track Wonderland is basically musical baby pictures, but some of them are really cute musical baby pictures. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy about what I was able to accomplish on a 4-track Fostex cassette unit. It's not the White Album, which I think was done on 4-track, but it's, some of them are pretty nice to listen to regardless. And again, eclectic. And I did these between like 1982 to like 87 or so. I released 3 different cassette releases, one of which was on Cause and Effect cassettes, and it was half with this combo I had for a couple of years called Pliny the Elder, and half of my stuff for the first one, and then the subsequent 2 were released, just under my own name. And some cool stuff on there. I basically, out of those 3 cassettes, I found really about a dozen songs that I really liked and thought, yeah, put these together and remaster them and get them out there because some people might like them. Early work, not great stuff. I mean, certainly by today's standards, I mean, it's going to sound kind of way dated, but I don't know, I like it. It wouldn't be the first album I would turn to if somebody asked me what would be a representation of my work, or what do I consider my best album, which would be Mistakes Have Been Made. But it's good, I like it. Not great. I don't know if I've ever done great. I think I've done really good, but this would be good. To medium. I guess that's it. 10 albums. There we are. So yeah, I've had a little bit of a strange life. I've had a lot of unusual things happen. Granted, not recently. Most of this kind of goes back to my 20s and my teens and much earlier. But it's been a long, strange trip. And most of this I've not really talked about publicly, but considering that civilization is collapsing, the biosphere is dissolving before our eyes, and my lifespan could probably be measured in months as opposed to years because of that and stuff. Who cares anymore? And nobody knows who I am anyway. So there it is. So there are some memories that I've always dragged around with me, and some very early ones. Early to the extent that child psychologists that I've read have said they shouldn't happen, that you shouldn't, A, be that aware at an age, I'm talking from 0 to 2, and B, you shouldn't retain memories. You're supposed to be like a little blank slate, and I don't believe that. And these early memories that I have kind of, in my mind, have always pointed to the notion of pre-consciousness, reincarnation, that kind of thing. But my earliest memory, and it's really mundane, but to me, for myself, it's important, is I'm at my grandparents' house. My parents and my brother and I are visiting our grandparents in rural Michigan. And I don't know how old I was. I was probably not yet 1. And I'm in a little basket, a little hand carrier. And they plop me down on the dining room table. And across from the dining room table, there was a doorway into what we used to call the vestibule, but it was just basically a hallway cum laundry room with a trash incinerator on the right-hand side and washer and dryer, and then you go out to the garage from there. and a clock off to the right that used to go tick, 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 maddeningly. So, so my grandparents are on the right-hand side, my grandfather, my grandmother, and then my dad on the other side of the door, and my mom. And my dad was a tool and die foreman at Chrysler, and you know, but a malcontent and just constantly bitching about his job, which he was doing at the time. You know, my boss is a jerk. You know, the hours suck. Whatever. Blah blah blah. And my grandpa never really liked my dad, so he's just kind of standing there and going, "Yeah, whatever, you slobs." So, at some point in time, I mean, I was following this conversation, and at some point in time, I must have started making little baby noises, because my grandfather comes up, and he looks over me, and, you know, making baby noises back at me. And my reaction to that was absolute rage and indignation. How dare you, peasant! How dare you be condescending to me, you filthy prole! I mean, I just reacted horribly to it, and I must start crying and throwing a little tantrum and whatnot. But it was like, you know, Stewie and Family Guy. In those early years, I was and that's a theme that is carried through my entire life, and on some level, I felt like this lifetime is kind of a comeuppance for maybe prior lives where I was just an arrogant douche, because I've had just wham, wham, wham in terms of teaching me humility over the years. So, yeah, so that was that. So probably, I don't know. I mean, I was still old enough to be wheeled around in a pram. I forget what they call it in this country. But and we lived in St. Clair Shores, and, you know, which we had a corner house. My dad made good money at Chrysler, so we could afford it. This was, you know, prior to parents getting divorced and me moving down to the quasi-ghetto, basically. My mom would wheel me around the block every day, and trying her best to be a good suburban mom, despite her tendencies. So she's wheeling me around the block every day, and I'm looking up at the sky. And there's always these strange things in the sky. They're geometric patterns, or like these weird complex tetrahedrons, and, you know, and they're always changing shape, and they're always changing color. And to get even weirder about it, I feel like they're communicating with me, like there's some data going back and forth. And, you know, years later, I mean, I remember this vividly, but for the longest time I thought this was just, you know, just childhood hallucinations. Until I read a Whitley Strieber book, and I can't remember where exactly I found it. It might have been The Secret School. I tried looking for it at one point, you know, in the text, and just, yeah, other things to do. But if memory serves, he wrote about experiencing exactly the same thing. And wrote about, I think, at least one person, maybe more, that had mailed him, sent him letters about this very same thing. So when I read that, it was like, oh really? Oh, okay. So I'm not the Lone Ranger with this one. So that was interesting. It gets even more interesting as we go on. So time goes on, and, you know, in St. Clair Shores, we had a nice big house, and I was lucky enough to have my own bedroom. Sort of lucky enough, because, and I'm not absolutely sure what conclusion to draw here, so I'm not making any assumptions about it. But there were things in my room at night. There were presences. Could never actually see them, but I always felt like they were there. And there would be certain physical things, like the curtains would move back and forth, really shaking. And I was terrified. I kept running out of the room and out of the house. It got so bad that my parents actually put a lock on the door to lock me in at night, which, resulted in me pounding on the door and screaming. But it was, I was terrified. And there were little things that I drew when I was a kid, weird little heads. And one thing a couple things that stood out to me, and granted, this was I was born in 1964. So this was happening in the mid to, late 60s. Or, probably 65, 66, 67. Well before the Greys were a thing. Well before the notion of abductions were a thing. Popularized in the media. So we had kind of two living rooms. We had a big one, kind of, central to the place. And then we had another one which was on the way to the garage. Nice two-car suburban garage. And in that other one, the secondary living room, we had that crappy 70s wood paneling. And there was one part of the wood paneling, there was one panel that I couldn't ever look at because it had this weird kind of double knot shape in it, surrounded by kind of this thing. In fact, it looked like that. And I couldn't look at that directly because if I did, I would get shit scared. I mean, I would just be terrified. And I remember also there was a Star Trek with this alien. There were a couple of them with big-headed aliens. One that were fairly human-looking, but there was another one, and it was always on the end credits with this thing, bulbous head and triangular eyes, and that would freak me out too. So make of that what you will. Again, this is, before the gray alien is ubiquitous now, but it wasn't then. So was this me just picking up on something, from science fiction stuff on television? I don't know. But it scared the hell out of me. And other things that were kind of weird. I remember I had this dream at one point where I'm kind of walking through this mist, and I must have been like 3 or 4 years old. And there's this thing, this kind of weird amorphous thing with a long neck and big jaw full of teeth. And it's sentient, and it becomes aware of me, and it looks at me, and it just lets out this noise that I can't even explain. And it years later, I encountered the work of Francis Bacon, the painter. And it was one of those figures from his famous painting, which was figures at the base of a crucifixion, was the name of it, like his most famous work. And it was that thing. So again, was that something that I picked up out of it being on television? I don't know. But yeah, just, and that's kind of a really minor, nonsensical thing, but I remember running out of the room into the, sub-living room, and my parents are having their Manhattans, and and I'm just screaming my brains out in sheer terror. It was just really an odd thing. So, fast forward a little tiny bit, and this is where my notions of reality not being exactly fixed, that have been corroborated by so many sources now. And everybody's talking about glitches in the Matrix and this whole thing being a simulation, and I'm kind of on the side of that. I think it is. You know, to quote Roger Ebert, close to the time of his passing, he wrote on a little note, I guess second to last words, this is all one elaborate hoax, and alluding to a vastness beyond this. And in 30 plus years of me reading and sometimes interviewing personally NDE experiences, that's what I'm led to. I don't want to say believe, but I'm led to assume. But back to this thing. I'm in kindergarten, and I'm going to Masonic Heights Elementary School, and I had this little vest that I wore, made of little ringlets, cute little kid vest, and it had buttons, and they were little brown buttons, typical brown buttons with the kind of a swirly coloration, you know, various shades of brown, little whites and stuff. And they had 4 holes in them. And I was, you know, at that age, I was already a daydreamer. And I would sit there and I would take my fingernails and I would dig into the 4 holes and I'd play with the buttons. And I mean, I had them memorized. I wore that vest all the time. And I just count 1, 2, 3, 4. While the teacher was ha 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 ha. And one day I've got that vest on, and I start to play with it, and it's got 2 holes in each button, not 4. And I just freaked. You know, I just completely lost it. And the principal, Mr. Albert, I think it was, took me home in his Volkswagen because I had a complete and utter meltdown. And he told me on the ride home that his Volkswagen could only make left-hand turns because he was basically stalling for time to figure out what the hell was going on with me. But I mean, reality did a thing that it wasn't supposed to do, you know. And was it a glitch in the Matrix? Was it a Mandela effect, my own little personal one? Or was it just me completely misremembering something? Was it just me, just a random brain fart in the kid's brain? But that's always stuck with me. And he drove me home in this long, circumnavigated way and was just asking me all kinds of questions. How are things at home? You know, all that type of stuff. And I remember all this vividly. It was, you know, one of those important memories that I've drug around with me all these years. Fast forwarding past my parents' divorce, we're living in this lower flat on Balfour Road in Detroit. And, yeah, kind of a slightly scummy place. We had cockroaches and stuff in the basement and everything. But, you know, not horrible. And at the time it was really pretty because there were all these, you know, Dutch elms forming this canopy over the streets, which later fell prey to Dutch elm disease. But when we lived there, it was actually fairly pretty, you know, nice mixed neighborhood. And I was kind of the class clown in school. Class clown cum thug. So, our mom sends me and my older brother, 5 years older, out to go to the store to buy her some stuff. And it's like 8 o'clock at night. It's Tuesday or something like that. And I'm in the back of my brother's bike. He's pedaling away. And we get really close to the store, and this car turns a corner and wham, hits us. And I go flying. And, you know, I hit my tailbone right on a curb, which was excruciatingly painful. And the crowd gathers, and I'm yelling at them, call an ambulance, you bastards, you know. And the guy is like some middle-aged dude with a couple of bimbos, and no ambulance ever came. This guy, this guy takes the broken, bent-up bike and sticks it in his trunk and drives me and my brother back to our place. And he probably paid my mom off because she was always strapped for cash because she was a drunk. And none of that is really hugely important. What's important is that the next day there was this kid, Paul Watson. I've known 2 Paul Watsons in my life. And this was this kid, you know, we got along and everything. He wasn't a really close friend, but we had really, you know, nice, friendly rapport. He comes up to me the next morning and he says, I had dreamed about you last night. I was like, really? What'd you dream? He said, I dreamed you got hit by a car. Oh. So, dreamed you got hit by a car, and I said, so describe this dream. And he described what happened. And I said, what time did you go to bed? And he said, well, I don't know, it was really early. It was like 7 or 7:30. Really? And as it turns out, he had the dream right when this incident occurred. Unless he was just only making all this up. But judging from his response to what I told him, you know, I mean, he was just completely shocked and freaked out, and so was I. Unfortunately, in the little library that the school had, there were all these books on ESP, and, you know, there's Charles Berlitz stuff, and UFOs, and Von Däniken and whatnot, you know. So, at that juncture, he and I started devouring everything that was in there about ESP, the sixth sense, move things with your mind, and all the, you know, stuff that was going on in the 70s. It's my battery charger. So, I don't know whatever happened to him. I mean, we moved up to Warren, Michigan, not too long after that. But that one was interesting, because that was just like, oh, that really started me on my whole study of the paranormal. But I developed an interest in occult type stuff because my mom had ordered the Man, Myth, and Magic encyclopedias. And as a kid that was really into horror movies and science fiction and giant monster movies, I mean, I just ate this stuff up. That was just like, wow. That's actually where I think that was when I first saw the Francis Bacon painting. I think it was in one of their indexes or something like that. So a weird thing happened, one of many weird things, and a lot of these I haven't even remembered, but this one was kind of messed up. Now at this age, I can't remember when The Exorcist came out, but I hadn't seen it. But I'm lying in bed, big, solid, heavy bed, and our mom wasn't home, but my brother was in the shower. And I'm just lying there. And this was after I'd really delved into those encyclopedias. And, you know, the bed started to kind of vibrate. I thought it was just my heartbeat. And then the bed started to shake. And then the bed started bouncing. I'm freaking out. I'm completely losing it, you know, and I'm, Mike, screaming for my brother. And he finally comes out of the shower, and of course the whole thing stops when he comes out of there. I have no idea what that was. Yeah, that was just, you know, again, it's another one of those things that happened. I remember it vividly. Was it something occurring in a hypnagogic state, where I couldn't tell between, you know, waking consciousness and sleeping? Maybe, I don't know. You know, a lot of these things are completely ambiguous, and almost all of them have some mundane explanation. Maybe not the car accident one, you know, but but a lot of them do. So it's really hard to say, but the cumulative effect is kind of interesting. So time marches on. We start moving to the suburbs, first Warren and then Sterling Heights and then Troy, and then because we had an apartment burned down in Troy, we ended up in Birmingham, which was really interesting because I got to see this wide range of demographics from, being on welfare and food stamps in the city to being in this really affluent townhouse that we couldn't afford in Birmingham, which is kind of this nouveau riche area of southeast Michigan. And all during this time, there's just weird things that happened. There were I remember for one grade, I went to, for like half a semester because I had various weird obsessions and learning difficulties. They sent me to a special school, and that was an odd experience. One day, it's spring, it's warm, no coats on or anything, and I'm walking down the street, and I look up at a power line, and there's a really big icicle on this power line, inexplicably there. And I grabbed some of the other kids as we're all walking to somewhere outside. And I go, "Do you see that?" And it's not dripping, it's just sitting there. And these other kids, they look at it and they're like, and they just go on. It's like it did, part of them saw it and part of them didn't, which was really strange to me. I'm like, do you see this or not? Because they reacted to it. But there was something in their minds that just phased it out. And they were really irritated at me for having pointed it out to them. So that was an interesting reaction, but, as I grew older, I started to get used to that. I started to get used to the idea that anomalous phenomena, unless you're really either fascinated by it or open to it, it's sort of like a episode of Doctor Who where the TARDIS is sitting right there out in the open, completely anomalous. And the Doctor points out to his companions that people are just going to ignore this thing. It's just like it's not programmed into their minds, so we'll just completely ignore that it's there. And there's a lot of that psychologically out there. But just different weird little things would happen. I remember I had this gig at a hotel, and every day I would walk through this courtyard in the apartment complex we lived in, Somerset Apartments. And there's this broken bottle in the lawn. It was smashed in a particular way, semi-submerged. And it was blackberry brandy, and I remember that because it had a purple label, and I love the stuff. Being a little dope-smoking, acid-tripping, alcohol-guzzling delinquent that I was, I would see this every day in blackberry brandy. And one day I'm walking, exact same bottle, broken in the exact same way, and it says ginger brandy, and it's got a brownish label on it. And at that juncture I was just like, okay, whatever, because all kinds of weird stuff was happening. I was starting to get SLI phenomena going on, streetlight interference, where you walk under a streetlight and it goes out. And that's happened, probably thousands of times to me. It used to irritate the piss out of me because when I lived in Hamtramck and I was driving beaters, which I still do, there was a street light right outside the place I rented. And come home from a gig, there'd be some car problem, it'd be dark out, but I had a really good street light. But invariably, as soon as I started trying to work on the thing or diagnose what was going on under the hood with all this ample light would go out. Bastard. But that happened to me all the time. And there were witnesses. There were people like a girlfriend of mine in Minneapolis. We were down in the Southwest, just taking a vacation. Went to Roswell and stuff like that. And we're in an underground parking garage, and as I'm walking past all these parking garage lights, they're just bink, 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 out. Another girlfriend, I've had a few of those, in Farmington Hills. She lived in this kind of condo complex, and the garages all had these lights, external lights pointing out. And I would walk up to one and it would go out. And I'd walk away. Had a street light on one of the places I lived in Minneapolis that basically if I got within 30 feet of it, it would go out. And if I backed out, it would go back on. And I would do that. You know, I'd do that like dozens of times. And it would behave the same way. So it just got to be something that I got used to. And then, you know, fast forward and somebody in Britain wrote a whole book on that. You know, probably one of the stupidest superpowers a human being could have. What do? Can you move objects with your mind? No, can't. Sorry. Are you super strong? No. Strong enough, but not super strong. Can you go be invisible? No. Can you shut off streetlights? Yeah, I can do that. Isn't that great? Yeah, isn't that just utterly pointless? So, yeah, great hidden talent there. So a big one for me, probably the biggest thing that's happened for me, that really was helpful, because most of this other stuff was just confusing. I think I was around 18. And I know I was in the band Pliny the Elder at the time. My best friends were Bill and Ken in that band. And I was obsessed with death, always was. As soon as I found out that you die, I was just obsessed with it because I was terrified of it. Because I thought that death means annihilation, that your all important ego just goes poof, you know, and you stop. That's it, no more you. With all the studies that I've done in 47 years, I don't think that that's the case. I mean, I'm 99.999% sure that that's not how it plays out. But, you know, if it does, I mean, you won't be aware of it. So there would be no you to be freaked out by being forever in a black void, because there won't be any you. But I don't think that's how it works. And I can't define how it does work, because it seems like, you know, for every individual, there seems to be an individual reality that comes out of the death experience. But, you know, there are commonalities and everything, but it seems almost like you engineer those experiences for yourself, or your higher power does, your higher self, your connected self. I don't know. Anyway, I was obsessed with death, and I was terrified of it, and it was almost crippling. And I had read, you know, because I had a background in Eastern philosophy, you know, starting when I was 15, I got into Buddhism, Taoism, and Shintoism. And, you know, also was kind of getting into magic to a degree and a lot of other things. I was aware of astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and, you know, there were just all kinds of books out about it back then. And there was a cassette tape by a guy named Barry Konikoff. It was one side was subliminal and the other side was self-hypnosis, and it was, you know, to have an astral projection. And he had done 2 of those. He had done the first one, which I wish I still had, because it was very effective, and he did a second one that wasn't as. But I tried for 1.5 years to have one. And this is how it played out. At the time, we lived in a townhouse, the aforementioned townhouse in Birmingham. And I took the basement, made my own little room in there. And one night, you know, after falling asleep to that hypnosis thing, I wake up and I went to bed. I was on a tea kick for a while, so I drank massive amounts of tea. And I went to bed with a full bladder, and I woke up at about 4 in the morning. Bladder just, you gotta use the bathroom. The bathroom was on the, second floor. So I get up out of bed, and I walk up the first flight of stairs. And then I go through the kitchen, and I turn around, and I go through the living room, and I start up the second flight of stairs. And I'm groggy, as you would be, you know, when you're first waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. But pretty soon I start to ungrog, and I'm kind of halfway up the stairs, and I realize a couple things. I realize that I can't feel the carpet on my bare feet. And then I look down, and I realize that that's because my bare feet are not actually touching the carpet. They're about that far above the carpet. And I also feel a little bit taller. About, that much taller. And I'm going, I'm not putting 2 and 2 together at this juncture. But I start to go, am I dreaming? Am I out of my body? And I head up right straight to the bathroom, and I go into the bathroom, and I'm going, oh, I'm out of my body. Well, I probably shouldn't use the bathroom. Because, in theory, I'm down there in the basement, and I might wet the bed. So I'm awake. I'm, like, wholly conscious. And then I go, okay, I'm going to go back downstairs. And I hover step down the steps. And I stand in the middle of the living room. And I'm going, is this just a really vivid dream? Because I've had lucid dreams before. And I'm going, I do a little thing where I jerk myself backwards, because I notice that when I would be conscious in a dream that I wasn't enjoying very much, if I jerk myself backwards, I would, like, cause the whole scene to somersault and change into something potentially better, or get me out of the sleep state entirely. So I tried that. Did nothing. I looked at the phone, and I tried to turn it into a lobster, or get it to metamorphose in some ways. And I looked around, and it was basically the same room. But what was interesting also was that I could see everything, but none of the lights were on. Everything seemed to have its own light source. Very soft, very muted, but I could see it all. So that was interesting. And I'm standing there, and basically I'm looking at my hands, and they're, my hands. I'm reciting my social security number, my address, my phone number, my full name, over and over again. And I'm just I'm awake. I am absolutely awake. I am hovering about an inch or so off of the living room carpet. And I'm just going, okay, well, this is boring. Because it was. It was just like I'm standing there, reciting my statistics and, pertinent information, but nothing's going on. I'm hearing no interesting sounds, seeing no weird beings, choirs of angels, none of that crap. I'm just standing there. It's very mundane, which was reassuring. So I think, all right, I might as well do something with this. So I start walking towards the door, hover towards the door. And I reach my hand out, and I go, you know what? I could just probably pass right through this thing. Ooh, why don't I just pass right through the window? And we had a big piece of furniture, waist level, right in front of the window with the blinds, Venetian blinds. And I start to walk right through this thing. And basically, my waist, I look down, and there's my waist, going right through this wooden thing. And I'm just, wow, that's so cool. And I reach my hand out, and I watch it go right through the blinds. And then I start to put my head through the blinds. And then I hear this voice, really loud, very much in control voice, go, "No." And I feel like I'm sucked right through the floor. And I sit bolt upright in bed, and there's no break in consciousness, as you would have if it was a dream. I mean, it was just like, boom. Right there, I sit up, and I'm really happy. I mean, it was just like, I did it. I did it. So, you know, I couldn't wait till like 7 o'clock in the morning or something like that to call my friends and go, I did it. I was out of my body last night. Yay! And that was just, that basically got rid of my fear of death after that. And it was sort of like a little gimme from Multiverse or Higher Power or whatever. Because as much as I've tried over the years to replicate that, I never was entirely able to do it. I came close once when I was living with my girlfriend in Minneapolis, and we were going to have a party downstairs. We lived on the top floor. And I fell asleep to a tape loop that I had made of, I can leave my body, I am out of my body. And it was going over and over again, and I was listening to it. Walkman, headphones, and just lying down, and I was lying down with my hands up like that, which I guess is one way to help facilitate an OBE. And I start to feel, I'm starting to like pull up, I'm starting to sit up. And I'm hearing all this noise. It's like, it sounded like the Tibetan monks with their horns and their clattering things on, times 10 on meth. I mean, it was just that sound that so many people report. And I'm starting to sit up in bed, but it's not me. And it's really interesting. My eyes were closed, but as soon as I started to sit up, I could start to see the room. It was just kind of going. But I felt like I was attached by some glue-like substance. So once I realized, oh, I'm leaving my body, I was just whoop, right back into it. So that was the only other close call I've had. And in fact, the past 20-some years have been incredibly boring. Because try as I may, aside from some weird Mandela effect things and some double takes with little glitchy things, there hasn't really been a whole lot since then. It's kind of like life has sort of narrowed into this weird little tunnel. But, lots of research, used to be a little bit of field work here and there. None whatsoever. I have no conclusions about any of this. I don't even know how much of this world that we're living in is real. So many of the NDEs that I've looked at, read, point in, I died, I left my body, I looked back at the earth, and it was just a dream. It was just a little tiny dream. And if you think about it, I mean, you're here for 80 years or so, if you're lucky. I don't know, right now, getting old on a dying planet and a collapsing civilization doesn't sound like lucky to me, but, who am I to judge? But, ultimate conclusions, I have none. And I'm a very clinical and skeptical person when I look at stuff like this. And I'm not particularly woo-woo, I'm not a new ager. But I look at this stuff a lot because to me, these are the frontiers of understanding. The fringes are where you can learn the most. But for me, studying the paranormal has been like trying to put together a puzzle where you're given like a piece or two a day. But they're all end pieces. So the puzzle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But the details, what it actually looks like, nope. So I'm given all these different puzzle pieces, end pieces, corner pieces, all this stuff that which, you know, makes the ultimate reality to me very mysterious still. And I'm an ant, you know, I feel like I'm an ant on an anthill. And I have the visual capabilities of a little tiny ant on an anthill. And there's all these big looming shapes. And I don't know what they are, but they're dogs and their feet and their tricycles and their, you know, garbage flying by or whatever. And I see these phenomena and I'm trying to understand them, but I can't because I'm a stupid little ant. That's how I feel. So, conclusions, I have none. I'll probably know a lot more about this when I'm dead, assuming, you know. But, yeah, for now I just study and I read and I form no real conclusions. And as far as conclusions go, that's it for this. Okay, bye. So I was born in a hospital in Detroit, but my family, my parents and my brother and I lived in a suburb called St. Clair Shores, which was at the time, you know, kind of a reasonably affluent, sort of like middle to upper middle class suburb of Detroit. My dad was a tool and die foreman for Chrysler, so at that point in time, that was really good money. And you only needed one breadwinner to sustain a family. And we had a nice corner house. It wasn't a harmonious environment. My brother was 5 years older than me. While he was in school, I would be plopped in front of the television, and you know, my parents would argue in the kitchen and throw things at each other. And my dad ultimately left after my mom chased him through the house trying to stab him with a pair of scissors. So, yeah. So there was kind of this facade of normalcy, but everything, you know, behind the surface was pretty bad. And I had a distaste of television for quite a while because I associated it with violence and scary things. And so after my parents divorced, we were there for, I don't know, a handful of months, and we were ostracized because we were kind of on the vanguard of the cutting edge of divorce in the USA. But I can't remember the exact mechanics of it, but my dad eventually got the house, and we ended up renting a lower flat on Balfour Road in Detroit. And it wasn't, you know, it was kind of between Grosse Pointe and, you know, and ghetto, and it wasn't, it was very working class, working poor. And we eventually ended up on welfare and food stamps, and I ended up, my mom would trade the food stamps for booze money, so we had bare cupboards, which I filled in with learning how to be a good little shoplifter and stealing food to eat. You know, so it was kind of a rough, gritty, urban upbringing after having like 5 years of affluence and every want satisfied. So it was, yeah, like the whole, you know, the rug got pulled out from under me at a very young age. But what that did was it gave me a sense that nothing is really secure, and, you know, you are your own security. No one is going to do that for you. And that stuck with me. And it also gave me a sense of how quickly things in life can change. And so we're in Detroit, and it wasn't, you know, I have feelings of nostalgia about it. I mean, scary Detroit. You're going to get killed. well, think of all the people on a daily basis that don't get killed there, and you have a more positive attitude about it. I don't know. I liked it overall, and my older brother had difficulties in Finney, and so the younger kids would, you know, the younger siblings would pick on me, so I'd pick back with a vengeance, and eventually I got to be kind of like the, you know, one of the school bad boys and class clown, and you know, and learned to knife fight and do all kinds of stuff like that. I was well on my way to to a life of crime, basically. And we were there for, I think it was about 5 years, I think. But Detroit in those days, in the, you know, in the 70s, was kind of a cool place. I mean, there was always music. I think of the song Summer in the City a lot when I think back on Detroit, and I think of, yeah, that's what it was like. You know, there was this kind of, this haze over everything. You know, this kind of foul-smelling, smoggy haze from all the industrial crap, you know, this miasma floating around the city. And I never realized how bad Detroit smelled until years later. I ended up going down to Florida on a video shoot, running lights and stuff like that with some friends of mine from Minneapolis. And after 2 weeks of desensitizing, I come back and I go, "You didn't tell me my city stunk. You didn't tell me how bad this place smells." So yeah, we were meaning to tell you. We thought you knew. So yeah, so Detroit was kind of, you know, it was character building. And at that point in time, it was mostly knives. I mean, there weren't, you know, gun violence was something that happened, but it wasn't the way it is now, you know, just everywhere. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, I encountered it. A bullet whizzed by me one time. But it wasn't, you know, omnipresent. And actually, where we lived, it was beautiful because there were all these elms that formed canopies over the streets, and it was, you know, kind of pretty, even though our house was, you know, crap and it was just crumbling and everything, and cockroaches in the basement and stuff. But I ride my bike all over town, parent being, you know, alcoholic and some kind of personality disorder. I mean, I would say borderline or narcissism or something. There was something, in my opinion, underlying the alcoholism. But it was, that was difficult. I mean, that was a lot of crazy behavior and psychological torture and bordering at times on physical. Got beat up a lot, you know, by my parent. Put a stop to that after a while when I got big enough to fight back successfully. But yeah, it was a, you know, it was an endurance test. It was not pretty. So somehow we ended up moving to Warren for a brief period. We lived at this apartment complex, and right across from a community college campus, so I would run around in there during off hours and go through the science classrooms, opening doors and looking at, you know, bugs and little skeletons and stuff. And yeah, went to I think it was like 6th grade or something like that there, second half of it. I remember when we ended up there, I, you know, was like this new kid in the middle of school. After that, we ended up in Sterling Heights, another apartment complex, which we eventually got booted out of, or I think it was eviction. I'm not sure how that played out. A redneckish, you know, suburb of Detroit, surrounded by whacked out, dysfunctional people, and we were whacked out, dysfunctional people. ended up moving up to Troy, Michigan, which was sort of like half like these yuppies and half trailer trash, and and it was a really interesting high school experience. I remember, like, a few weeks into my freshman year, a bunch of the high school kids were in a shootout with each other, and one was dead, and another ended up in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And yeah, and that was when I started misbehaving myself in terms of various things, additives. Kind of went down that road for a while. Stopped when I came of age for various reasons, but one of which was I joined a band, and I was kind of like the designated teetotaler. But by the time that happened, I'd been through so many experiences that it all kind of said, you know, we're sort of done with you. You can stop taking us. You've hit a brick wall. We're not going to take you any further beyond consensual reality than we've already taken you. Piss off. So yeah, then we had an apartment fire, and we ended up in a townhouse in Birmingham, Michigan, that we could ill afford. And yeah, so, you know, I had to go to work. My brother was working, you know, basically giving our mother most of our money to keep a roof over our heads. And so more and more dysfunction, you know. And then ultimately, I ended up bailing out and moved down to Hamtramck into Lower Flat with Greg from my old band Softwar. And I was there for like 6 years. I stayed there. And the band practiced in the basement after a while, and it was just kind of a, you know, back to the gritty city life, and I liked it. You know, it was cheap. I could do practically anything and make a living there, so I think the rent was like $275 a month for for 2-bedroom Lower Flat. But eventually I left the band, and we ended up I ended up, you know, trying to piece something together there with other people, and nothing really took. I did a demo tape that in retrospect was kind of crap, really trying to be commercial, and I was pretty depressed. I was like, there is no future. I have no future. This is Detroit, brick wall. But some people I had befriended out of Minneapolis who were in the video field said, you know, why are you here? You've got, your music's cool, you've got so much promise, why are you living in this city? So I ended up moving to Minneapolis, and I was there for a while, and like 7 years, 92 to 99, and got a lot done there. Went from there to Chicago for a while, Rhode Island, got married foolishly, that didn't work. So after that, crashed and burned, ended up back in Detroit for a while, then Chicago, and then a yurt in the woods of southwest Wisconsin. And I've continued to have various adventures. I had a nice 3 years where I would basically do summer work, farm work, you know, this, that, and the other thing, some temp stuff here and there. And then I'd end up going on the road in my van and shooting videos and playing open mics and stuff for like 3 winters in a row, and that was a pretty fun experience, and I'm glad I did it. You know, while still young enough to withstand the rigors of such a thing, but yeah, how do you condense all these decades into something just, you know, quick and dirty and easy to digest? I don't know. Yeah, so that's, you know, kind of the brief rundown of the various major things. I mean, you know, other things are jobs and relationships and all that kind of stuff. But I guess, you know, as an artist, well, you know, I guess I'll cover the whole artist thing in another video, but I was very politically motivated coming into the arts, and a lot of it had to do with the diversity of my background, because I went from, you know, a comfortable suburban setting to a pretty down and dirty city life, to, you know, these kind of hickish suburbs, inner ring suburbs of Detroit, to affluence, because we were at Troy for a while, and then our apartment burned down, and then we ended up in this townhouse in Birmingham, so surrounded by yuppies and people with money, and it was, you know, could barely afford it, but I got to see everything, you know. I got to see both sides of the American experience, the wealthy experience and the poor experience. Yeah, so the politics of injustice propelled me on to be a songwriter and to be an activist for a while. I mean, it was like all kinds of marches and stuff like that, and belonged to Amnesty International and all these other organizations, and really thought there was hope. And even in the 80s, when things were, you know, starting to go south in terms of everyone becoming materialistic and horrible, as opposed to, you know, we're all one and love one another and brotherhood of man and all that. Yeah, even in the 80s, because, you know, we knew the enemy. And, you know, now that things have just fallen apart so horribly, yeah, the enemy is us. And you know, we keep dividing along all these various lines, and it's really sad to see. But I guess that's what happens when a civilization finally reaches a point where it's eating its own tail and it completely falls apart. But yeah, so, you know, I had hope for a while. I had this notion of, we can, you know, take this gift that we have, this gift of foresight, this gift of seeing the higher road and the lower road and taking the higher one. And unfortunately, collectively, we have not done so. Some people do, you know, some people try, but I think it's a relatively small amount of people, and in a lot of ways I feel like there are those people of conscience and those gifted people and inventors and artists and people who design things and create things, and that's like 2 or 3%, and everybody else rides their coattails and clicks the remote and, you know, scratches their ass. And, you know, and they're either just completely complacent and taking it for granted, or they're, you know, actively trying to find ways of persecuting the people that have made their lives so good. So, yeah, you know, I mean, our political dynamic now being what it is, yeah, it's pretty much a illustrative of that whole dynamic. So, the future for me, I don't know how much of one I have, frankly. I feel like on a spiritual level, I've kind of come here to, you know, I've done what I could do. You know, did I make the world a better place? I don't know. Maybe I preached to the choir here and there. Maybe some people heard some songs and got something out of it. I don't know. At the end of the day, or the end of my life, whichever comes sooner, I would like to think that I did more good than bad, but I don't know. I guess, you know, that remains to be seen. So for my future, I don't know. You know, I'm coasting now. I've wrapped up an awful lot of stuff, and I'm not sure. And a lot of that is contingent upon the larger world. And the larger world's in trouble. I mean, we have, we have a pandemic, which is still a big question mark. We have diminishing biodiversity, you know, sixth grade extinction. We have climate change, which seems to be snowballing. We have, you know, kind of the disintegration, you know, disintegration of our whole society, and it almost seems like we're dividing into two different species practically. With I often joke that we're becoming the Eloi and the Morlocks of the time machine. But yeah, so I don't know, you know, what future we have. And especially, I mean, if we end up in some sort of global war scenario, I don't know. I don't give us good odds. And my feeling is that looking forward, there's a couple things that could happen. I mean, we're either going to cause our own extinction. Well, I mean, I think that's a given, but other things that I've heard, and this enters the realm of pure speculation, but, and I'm not going to, you know, go into all the source material and whatnot, but part of me thinks, for various reasons, that there may be a new human at some point down the road, you know, which sounds very New Agey, but again, for various reasons I'm not going to go into. I almost get a sense that if we make it through the bottleneck that we've created for ourselves, that, you know, leap forward in our psychological and spiritual evolution may occur. This may be a very different and better world hundreds of years from now. Or it may be Venus, and nothing's alive. Or anywhere in between, it's hard to say. You know, we could turn the world into a place that only sustains spores and tardigrades. But as a species, the way we're currently wired, we're wired for self-destruction. And I don't see, you know, it's like that scene in one of the Terminator movies, you know. It's just like, yeah, the Terminator just basically says that's just how you are. Sucks. It sucks. Completely sucks. But it is what it is. And so the future, for me, I don't know, question mark, probably a brick road, brick wall rather. Future for humanity, brick wall. Anybody's guess, but I can't say, given the nature of the human species, that it's going to be all bright and sunny. But maybe on some further day it will be. Maybe this is a birth. But one of those births that is extremely difficult. It's very hard to say. So, yeah, on that happy note, I guess that's it for this part. Music was pretty omnipresent when I was growing up. Detroit, you know, music was everywhere. Motown, you know, soul, rock. There was, yeah, you know, it was always around. I had an older brother, still have an older brother, and he had a huge record collection. So I got to hear, you know, most of it was fairly standard stuff. I mean, it was like Beatles and Stones, who my mom listened to as well, and Elton John. early Elton John, Yellow Brick Road, era was pretty big. I really liked that. And as a kid, I remember seeing the Yellow Submarine cartoon and just loved the music. I enjoyed a lot of it, but, it didn't really hit me on a, oh my God, this is, incredible level until I was about, I think I was around 12 years old. We had moved from Detroit. I think we were in Sterling Heights, and apartment complex there, and I started babysitting, and I wasn't a very good babysitter. I was, total lack of discipline. Kids pretty much destroyed places I babysat at, but there was this hippie couple that I was babysitting for that had this big-ass stereo, enormous. I mean, I was amazed they got away with it in an apartment on the second floor. And they had the thing, set to 11, basically. They said, yeah, there's some ice cream in the freezer if you want some, and oh, check out the record collection. And I was like, okay. So I leafed through all the records, and there was all this, Deep Purple, Savoy Brown, Black Sabbath, and then there was the first King Crimson album. And I never heard of him. It was that big, scary red face, and I was like, oh, I gotta hear this shit. So I put it on, and there's those delicate flute-like tones at first. I'm like, well, this sounds kind of boring. And then, bang. And that just, at the volume it was, and the intensity of it, it was nothing I'd ever heard before, and it just completely blew my mind. The whole album, I listened to it, from start to finish, and was just, completely taken over. I'd never experienced anything like that before, haven't really experienced anything like that since, and it was the catalyst for me to become a musician. Shortly thereafter, we had a library in Sterling Heights that lent out records, and my brother had a copy of the Illustrated History of Rock and Roll, a Rolling Stones book, and I had read a bunch of it and read about some of these characters. I was sort of aware of Bowie by his more commercial tunes, like Rebel Rebel and stuff like that, but hadn't heard any of the more interesting stuff, like Man Who Sold the World, and later Low was huge with me. But I read about Mott the Hoople and Roxy Music and Zappa, and so I made it a point to see how much of that stuff I could dig up from the library. So I got out of the library at one point, probably like a month after King Crimson, a copy of Bongo Fury by Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart. And that blew my mind, too. I mean, it was just, because I'd always liked humor. I was always into novelty tunes and just doing odd things with music. So that was pretty mind-blowing. And then I got into a bunch of his other stuff, got a copy of Freak Out, and some of his later stuff, Overnight Sensation and One Size Fits All, and was just amazed by the intelligence and and being a soon-to-be adolescent, the obnoxiousness of it, the humor. So, and at around that time, it was the 7th grade, I befriended another kid named Mike Poyer, who was this musical prodigy, played trumpet. I think he later went on to play first chair trumpet for the Symphony of Rome before he got hit by a car and died, unfortunately, very young. So, really sad. And he was the one in my personal life that. You know, we started doing these obnoxious little tunes together. He also played keyboards, and he had this obnoxious sounding electric piano with all kinds of different settings. And, so that was kind of my first attempt. All I did was sing horribly. But we made these weird little novelty songs and just screwed around, but I caught the bug for making music. And not that long thereafter, I got my first guitar, which I stole out of a storage unit, this old beat-to-crap acoustic guitar. And not too long after that, I think it was for a birthday, I got an SG copy from a music store called Strings and Things, and started learning, you know, I started off, and I'll address this a little bit later, but I started off learning how to play lead and kind of becoming a speed player. But yeah, so, you know, those were heady times for me, and I was discovering stuff like, you know, all the prog bands like Yes and early Genesis and Gentle Giant and Gong and solo Steve Hackett, solo Peter Gabriel. That first album was out. I would say the first Peter Gabriel album and Wind and Wuthering were pretty early on for me, and those were just fantastic. So I had that phase, which never really ended. I mean, Moody Blues, Jethro Tull, I mean, all that stuff I still listened to and never really stopped. And at about the same time, there was this radio show, I think it was on W4 or WABX, I can't remember, but it started at midnight on Sunday or something like that. And there was a DJ, Sky Daniels, and he had this show, Overseas Operator. And that's where I first heard stuff like Can and Faust, Kraftwerk, a lot of the krautrock type stuff, and then a lot of the stuff like Tangerine Dream I first heard on there. But he discovered punk. So he was playing the first singles by the Pistols, like God Save the Queen and Anarchy in the UK, and I got really into punk. And I'm surprised it took me decades to learn about the Cardiacs, which would become a favorite in later years. But yeah, because the synergy of punk and prog was kind of a possibility that seemed like, you know, it should not exist, but at least somebody attempted it. So I got really into punk for the politics of it, and for the urgency, and for the you know, that we've got to change things. Because one of the things, besides just sheer fascination with music, one of the things for me in becoming a musician was, at one point, I remember it was a very conscious choice, because I was dabbling with a bit of painting, and I was always drawing as a kid. And I had a certain proficiency as a writer, even at that age, you know, even like 12, 13, 14 years of age, just because I'd read so much and was really good at parroting different styles of writing. I was really into H.P. Lovecraft and wrote a couple pieces that were like spot on H.P. Lovecraft. I wish I still had them. But the big motivation for me, aside from just fascination with music, was feeling that there was something horribly wrong with the world, that people were hypnotized into a consensual reality trance. And, you know, reading like Gurdjieff reinforced that for me. And because I didn't watch a lot of television as a kid, I was kind of adverse conditioned towards television. For about 4 or 5 years, I didn't really watch it that much. There were a few things like Star Trek or whatnot. But we didn't even have one for the longest time after my parents divorced. So I would go to school and kids were just, the only thing they could talk about is what was on TV the night before, their favorite show. And it's like, wow, a bunch of zombies. And I'm reading, Edith Hamilton's mythology and stuff like that, and all this, fairly heady intellectual stuff. And I'm just going, wow, what an army of nulls kids are being. And that's played out now with what we have, which is, idiocracy, basically. The rise of the mediocre in our culture. So that's a consequence, I think, of mass media indoctrination and just, and hypnosis and the dumbing down, whether intentional or inadvertent, just due to the rampant commercialism of what's going on. But I digress greatly. The music. So I wanted to save the world. It was a really big John Lennon kind of trip for me. John Lennon, Bob Dylan, whoever. I was very informed by the notions of the 60s, which was got to make the world a better place. And fast forwarding is kind of funny. Funny and extremely sad. I think I was in my late 20s. I might have still been in Detroit. Can't remember when I saw it. But I saw this interview with Grace Slick, and I bring it up a fair amount because it really hit me hard, where she was saying that, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how she put it, but like everybody else in the 60s, I thought if I read the right books, took the right drugs, and wrote just the right song, that I could somehow change the nature of human aggression. And that was just, boom, that really hit me hard when I heard that. And that it basically said, yeah, you're just kind of stroking yourself, aren't you? But I fought that good fight for decades, and most of what I do is still trying to raise awareness on some level or another. Unfortunately, I'm a minnow fighting, I'm a minnow trying to swim upstream like a salmon, and it's not working. So there it is. But again, more digression, but that was my motivation for becoming a musician, other than just the sheer joy of sonic exploration. And, so punk happened, and I found that really a catalyst for my political motivations. And but I never walked away from experimental music. And I was lucky in that there was a radio station, WDET, that at the time played a lot of adventurous types of stuff. So, they'd be playing some sort of New Orleans jazz and then follow it with something from Voyage of the Acolyte by Steve Hackett and then something by Zappa, and, just all this really cool free-range stuff. But so WDET played, I think, probably within the space of a week or two. They had the Cincinnati Audio Arts program that they did, which was mind-blowing because it was like, fire sign theater level manipulation of different audio forms, and some of which were musical, some of which were just, kind of audio theater. Some of it was poetry put to music by all these different creative people, and that really was an influential thing. And then around the same time, they did this, Ralph Records had done a thing with, what's his name? Penn, from Penn and Teller. Penn Jillette. Where, it's all a put on, but they basically lock him in a room for a week, and he has to listen to stuff like The Residents and Ronaldo and the Loaf and Yellow and Tuxedo Moon and Chrome and some others. Snakefinger, all these albums that were on Ralph. And, and that was amazing to me, because that was another element of music that was just, wow. The Residents in particular, and Ronaldo and the Loaf really influenced me. And it's a fun show. I mean, it's out there. I think you can find it on YouTube, and basically. I think it's an hour long, but it just has, you know, him slowly going insane as he listens to all this music. But anyway, that really hit me, and I just so happened to have two high school friends, Bill and Ken, that were, you know, into progressive music, and, you know, I turned them on to this stuff, and then, hey, it doesn't take a whole lot to do this on an artistic level. Let's make some stuff like this. So I had a quote-unquote band called Pliny the Elder for a while, which was Ken and Bill, and at times this other friend of ours, Gary, who has since passed on, and a couple other people, a couple of guitarists, a guy named Norman, a guy named Eric. We had some guy named Steve later on, but names obscured to protect the innocent. But it was a lot of experimental stuff, and there was musicality to it. I could play. Ken was a good drummer. Bill came up with some brilliantly insightful lyrics, probably, in retrospect, probably some of the most articulated thoughts in the whole project. But for a couple of years we made this cacophonous noise, and structured and interesting, and a lot of it just really funny. And my idea was essentially to shock people out of the consensual trance. But the effect was basically people would hear it, we'd play it for people, and they would either get it and think it's funny and just kind of roll with it, or they would just just a confused dog look, and it would just... So I found that after a couple years of doing that, even though we'd had a couple brushes with getting distribution and whatnot, I wasn't getting anywhere with it. I wasn't really able to reach a larger audience by making crazy noises. So, as much as I enjoyed it. So then I ended up in a band that at the time was called Gone Morose, but later changed the name to Soft War. And I was doing that for 5 years. And stuff that was informing me at that time would be like Kate Bush, Nick Cave, David Sylvian, Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance, Bruce Coburn. And the band, you know, there was a... at first it was sort of artsy. And I sang sort of like Morrissey in the early days until I took some lessons. But we later, once a guitarist left, we kind of firmed up into sort of I don't know how really to describe it, but it was sort of influenced by Midnight Oil. There was, you know, there was stuff kind of coming in like Pixies and Replacements and REM and artists like that kind of made me aware that you can do straight ahead music and still have intelligent and thoughtful words going on. The Police were another one. So, you know, did that for 5 years, and that was a sad case in that it was one of those bands that really could have been. And we had started to make some headway. We had done an EP that was mostly due to the tireless efforts of Greg Kutcher promoting it. We were getting a decent amount of shows regionally, in a couple different regions. We were doing stuff going out east, going south, and getting a fair amount of radio play. I think we might have hit CMJ at a couple points. So we were starting to be a little tiny buzz band. Again, mostly due to the constant phone calling of Greg. but also due to the fact that we were good and we were a bit different than everything else out there. And unfortunately, none of us had trust funds. 2 of us had serious jobs. The thought had been, yeah, if we could do like the Violent Femmes and just basically get into a van and live out of a van for 6 months, and record something as a follow-up after that, and then repeat that. Yeah, maybe we could get somewhere. Maybe we could get what artistically, would have been our due. But unfortunately, addictions, egos, I certainly played a part in the latter. And as one of my bandmates amply pointed out at one point in time, I had this silly notion that just because you're good, it's going to come to you. And no. In fact, I mean, these days, if you're good, you're going to be buried under all of that, which is not good, which is one reason why I'm pretty much calling it quits at this juncture. But even then, I mean, it was he who shrieks the loudest. I remember meeting Bill Bruford when I was his room service attendant at a hotel, which catered to a lot of rock stars, and he was really cool, really nice guy, spent some time with me, and said it really comes down to you got to hype yourself. You got to be the loudest voice out there. And I've never been good at that, and unfortunately didn't have money behind us, no trust funds for any of us, didn't have, we self-managed, and maybe that would have been, something if we had gotten a smart, savvy, and connected manager. Maybe that would have been something, but what do we have to offer? Just poor folks making good music. So, yeah, so that kind of petered out, and I left the band after a really horrible show at CBGB's. It was just kind of, we were supposed to headline, and we got booted out of there into the place next door and played for like 3 people. And after that, I was just, screw this. I can't do this anymore. I'm going solo. Went solo. Tried to piece together a band with some various people that I knew in Detroit, and that didn't really happen. And I did a demo tape, kind of an album of stuff that I thought was more folksy, and it basically came out sounding like Bad 10,000 Maniacs with a male singer. It was just crap. Probably one of the worst things I've ever done, just trying to be commercial. And whenever I do that, I basically suck. So, so yeah, tried that. And then Minneapolis. So floundered in Detroit for a while. And then around 92, 91, I think late 91, befriended some people that were part of like a little comedic video collaborative out in Minneapolis, who one of the guys was stationed in Detroit, and they started hanging out at this music studio that I was doing some stuff at, engineering and recording, my stuff and other people's, and basically, why don't you come out and live in Minneapolis? I was like, okay. Yeah, Detroit's a great place to leave, so I did. And lived out there for 7 years, and I had a soundtrack company, started my own little mini vanity independent label, put out a bunch of stuff. I had a project called House of Usher, which started out as like a industrial parody, some parody of like Ministry and Thrill Kill Cult and stuff like that, but it ended up going a lot deeper and darker than that. And did the first Quiet with Orchestra project, World Without Words. Did a ton of soundtracks to video productions, a couple independent films. Had an acoustic duo with a woman named Jody out there, recorded an album for her. I put out a CD prior to that called Fashionably Angry, which actually got a fair amount of independent radio play and a lot of reviews from all over the world. So that was actually pretty heartening. I was one of the early adopters of internet marketing for music when very few other people were doing it, so that really helped. And then toward the end of my time there, I was working on what turned out to be the first John Ludi album, Hell's Laughter and Heaven's Ache. Put that together. Like I mentioned, a album for my cohort in the acoustic duo, Jody. And it was just sort of like, yeah, the bottom fell out of the soundtrack business for me and a lot of other people for various reasons. So I had friends in Chicago and thought, yeah, I'm always having a great time in Chicago. I had thought, well, I know people in Hollywood. Maybe I could go out there and do soundtrack work, or maybe I should try to do that in Chicago. And I chickened out. Hollywood was just too big for me, so I ended up going to Chicago and ended up doing basically doing a lot of AV work in terms of installed sound, and that started me off on my regular career, which we're not going to talk about, but it was system design and that type of thing. So, but, kept doing music. So in 2011, I came out to full-time in the driftless region of southwest Wisconsin, and the area that I live in is really small and it's really hipster. It's kind of hipster folk area. I had a duo with a guy named John for a while, for actually quite a while, actually longer than I was in my band in Detroit. And we did some good stuff together. It ended up not really, 50-50. It was kind of, ended up being mostly his stuff. And he writes some good stuff. And we recorded pretty much an album's worth of material, almost entirely his. But it, some of it is actually really good, really listenable. And, but one of the biggest problems that I've had in my career is gatekeepers. And in some ways the area has more gatekeepers than talent. So we found ourselves really not able to do much of anything. And I just said, I'm not a folk musician, and we're not able to penetrate this market, this local market of about 50 people too well. So time to hang that up. And so really I've just been, aside from that, which did take up a fair amount of time, mostly just worked on, my own solo albums and everything. And again, proud of the output that I've done in that respect. So playing style, the guitarists that really caught my ear were, obviously because of King Crimson, Robert Fripp, Steve Hackett, Alan Holdsworth was one, Steve Howe of Yes, all those guys. And my soloing style, and really, even the way that I write, was much more influenced by them. And they weren't like, not a lot of blues-based stuff going on. So like the usual was not into that. Still am not. Once in a while I do it. Once in a while I'll throw something bluesy in there to, just as an effect. But it's just, it's not where I live. What I started doing before I took lessons was I wanted to, do these really fast things that Robert Fripp would do. So I started doing them on one string. So I ended up like just learning how to just do this buzzsaw kind of right hand thing. And then I took lessons from a guy named Dan Mayer. He's a really good guitarist out of Detroit, and he's like, well, you know, there are actually scales that go up and down like that. Except I've never been, one aspect is like for a real guitarist, you know, it's kind of up, down, up, down, up, down. And I never really was good at that, so I just kind of hammer away like a moron, but it sounds good. So, I mean, I'm, you know, so, I mean, to the untutored ear, it sounds like I'm really good and really fast. But I'm not. I'm a really talented hack, and I would say that what I'm good at is doing a whole project from start to finish on my own. So I think I'm good at writing. I think I'm good at singing. I think I'm good at, you know, playing the various instruments that I play. You know, I think I'm good at engineering and production and putting the whole thing together in a coherent way with really pretty much nothing more than a handheld multi-tracker and Reaper, a laptop. So, yeah, not really a gearhead, not you know, I've found ways to do what I do really well, but in terms of me being a great guitarist or a great bass player or great singer, I don't think I'm any of those, you know, and I'm okay on keyboards too, but really not great on those. I mean, I can do things fast. I can do things really fast, but if you slow it down, a lot of it is kind of sloppy. But I guess influences, yeah, you know, bass would be you know, the greats, the Chris Squires, the Stanley Clarks, Alphonso Johnson, people like that. I've always admired people who, you know, play well beyond the point where I ever would be able to. If I practiced, I suppose I could be better. But peak practice for me was back in my teens, and I suppose if I had been more diligent in doing that, but, you know, I usually ended up having to work a couple jobs, and then I had a band and all that, so sitting there and really becoming proficient. I don't even know, maybe neurologically. So I've always been just like, classical musicians blow my mind because they can play things with such a level of exactitude. And everything I do, anytime I do it, it sounds just slightly different. Again, not to the naked ear, not to a non-musician, but to my ears, to these perfectionist producers' ears. I'm like, yeah, I slopped that one again. So, yeah. So, you know, musically, I think I'm good at really big picture things, and I'm very persnickety about my production. So, you know, I can work on a guitar solo for 16 hours straight, and if it's not exactly what I want, it's not going to stay. Which is one reason why I'm much more of a studio animal than a live one. I mean, I think I can pull it off live, but as a solo acoustic performer, not really crazy about doing that. I don't think I'm that compelling at it, and the music that I write is not, you know, conducive to that. Yeah, I'm good with a band behind me, a good competent band, but, you know, at this age and at this stage of the game in terms of where we are as a civilization, yeah, I don't think I'll be doing that. So yeah, that's it. John Ludi in a nutshell. All you ever wanted to know, and so much more. But if you've been patient enough to watch all these, I thank you for that. And in terms of music, I encourage you to get it out there if you like it. You know, share it with people. As long as it doesn't end up in a car commercial or something without my consent. Yeah, it's been a long, strange trip, and sometimes delightful, sometimes demoralizing, as I'm sure a lot of other musicians could relate to. But there it is. It's been a life. All right. Thank you. Bye.